I've become curious about my grandparents and my great-grandparents. Did you ever meet your grandparents?
Yeah, lived in reserve, but the Hudsons, I don't hardly know the Coopers, because Grandfather Cooper was killed very young. He was killed by supposedly El Figo Baca in a gang of El Figo Bacas, well thought of in New Mexico. He did become sheriff, but I think he rode with Billy the Kid, and he was kind of an outlaw before he became sheriff. And grandfather there at the Cross V Ranch was, they had a beef, they were butchering a beef. And this gang, 5 or 6 men, rode up masked and claimed that the beef was stolen. And Grandfather Cooper saw that there's going to be trouble, and Bruce, his son, was with him, and he told him, Bruce, go in the house and get the gun. Get a gun. And when he's crawling through the rail fence, so they shot him. He was killed there, and Grandfather Cooper was killed at that instance, by those gang of men. They had a trial later, but I don't know. I had whether in those days you might find a range cow and it might not be yours. It might not have your brand, and they butcher them if they was on their property and stuff like that. So I never did know. Mother claims that it was definitely their cow, of course, but she was always that way. I remember Grandfather Cooper he'd kill more bear and lion in New Mexico than anybody at that time. I guess that record stood for a long, long time. Till I think Frank Balke finally beat it, killing mountain lions or something. I don't know about these, but my mother would always get so mad that they'd tell the stories that Grandfather Cooper would be out late. He killed this bear and he didn't have time to get back to the ranch, and he was hungry with his dogs from hunting this bear down. That he cut his tongue out and cooked it, and Mom said he never did eat bear tongue, so I don't know about that. And then one time, Grandmother Cooper, he was gone somewhere, and the dogs treat a mountain lion. She thought it was just a bobcat, and she took a gun out there to quieten those dogs and get them to come back to the house. And so she shot this, and it fell out of the tree. It was a great big old mountain lion, and the dogs finished it off, I guess, on the ground, and she butchered that. We had the skin from that in a rug for a long, long time. And we had one of Grandfather Cooper's grizzly bears at that time. Now, you'd be in trouble for killing a grizzly bear, I guess, but those days they killed the cattle and everything, and that was the thing, was to kill them, But, and then I think that bear skin, maybe both those rugs burned up in our house out there at Reserve when it burned. We had them out there. I know we had them out there, and maybe one of the aunts had taken them before, I'm not sure, but whatever happened to them. But I remember that big old bearskin rug, the head there on the floor, and the kids would lay our head on it and lay on that bearskin rug, with his teeth, big fangs showing, and man, it had claws like that, the size of my finger. It was a big sucker.
But your father's father, you
yeah.
met him.
Oh yeah, they lived there at Reserve. Granddad, he was the one that you might be talking about, splitting wood. A stick hit him in the eye, and he lost an eye. And he just they did get him an artificial eye, but it never did work. And so he just had the bare eye socket there. He was killed at 90 years of age across the street from where Glenn McCarty lives now. Hard of hearing at that age, and sight was bad with one eye, and he walking down the street all the time. Their house there's still some locust trees up there. It was the gate. It's just west, like a quarter of a mile, maybe at the most, up from the house, Glenn McCarty's house, that old house that's still standing there. that all us kids were born in and everything, you know. And that's where Grandma and Grandpa Hudson lived. So they always called her, I hardly knew her name because Grandpa called her Shug. And she had asthma real bad. She hardly ever left the house. And they had a big fireplace that they kept the fire going on, all winter all long. That was the only heat in that house. And she had pulled her rocking chair right up in front of that. And gosh, she took asthma shots, asthma door, I think is what they called them. Until she didn't hardly find a place in her legs anymore to take shots. But she wheezed so bad she couldn't come outside. And I just remember her sitting in that rocking chair in front of that. And then, of course, there was Bess. Bess had been hit in the face. Bess is the one that had a scar in the face. She was also hit by a stick of wood when they split the wood and it flew and hit her. Or else Grandpa hit her with an axe. I'm not sure what she walked into, an axe or something. She had a bad scar. And that may have affected her mentality because she was smart, I tell you. She never forgot a birthday. I don't care how distant they were. And she could tell you anybody's birthday. And she died in Silver City years later. That she was in a nursing home down there at Fort Bayard when she died. They had gotten her there. That was after, but grandmother Hudson died first years ago, and then grandfather lived there by himself. Finally, Mom and Dad moved him to a little house across the street from that old house. It's just a little slab board, a little house there that Granddad lived in for a long time. But then, I don't know whether the house was still standing up there where they originally lived for so many years, that he was walking down the street when he stepped in front of that pickup, and it was some stranger that didn't recognize him, didn't know how deaf and stuff he was, and he just stepped out in front of the pickup and was killed. So they're all buried there at Reserve.
What do you remember about your schooling? What was your school like?
Well, we lived there at they call it the Pope Mesa place, because that's who owned that, originally built that house, and then dude McCarty came the owner some way, and then we lived there. Dad was kind of like a sharecropper. He raised hay, corn, and like I asked Lynn one time, I says, was Dad a sharecropper? Because Glenn says, I guess so, because I never saw any money change hands. They never had any money. I don't know how in the world we lived, Jeff, but 8 kids, and we never missed a meal. We never went hungry a meal, because there's all canning stuff from the garden, and in the summertime, fresh stuff, of course, and cows, and we butchered pigs, and we butchered calves, and I remember Granddad Hudson, that we had this open pit well with a pulley and a bucket of water, and then the bucket was where we kept some dairy products and things to keep them cold in the summertime down in that well. And then we had the ditch went right by that house. It's not there anymore, and we had this big burlap covered, we called it a cooler, with a box like this, a foot wide and 8 inches deep or something, that we kept full of water with it dripping on that, and it spread out in the burlap. That was our refrigeration, all we had. And of course we had lots of clabber when the milk would sour, and the cream would rise. I don't know whether you ever saw raw milk or not. All you see is pasteurized, but it's sour, and the cream all rise to the top, and Mother would scrape all that cream off and make butter out of it. We had the crock jar with a plunger in it, and we'd churn butter like that. In that, it was just kids that helped do that, up and down till the butter churned, and then we had all the buttermilk with nice big pieces of butter in it, and it was great. And but we lived there until, I don't know what year we moved to a house that Dad owned, he had her rented out. I remember one time, Delbert Davenport was his name, had married one of those Romero women, a great big fat woman, and was renting that house, our old house down there. And Dad sent me down to collect the rent one Sunday. They were a couple months behind paying their rent. And so I knocked on the door, and this must have been 10:30 at least in the morning, and come in. So I opened the door, and there's the bed was right inside the door, and there was that big old fat woman there in her bed, and old Delbert. I got so excited, I said, I don't know why, but Dad wants me to collect the rent or something. I finally got out to him, I guess, and I don't think I got it, but it was hard to get people to pay up because nobody had any money. So I don't know, but then sometime we would walk from there. The grade school was closer to the house I'm talking about that burned down eventually down there. And we'd walk all that way across the Starkweather Canyon, up that long trail on the side of the hill, through Reserve, all the stores and filling stations, the couple commercial buildings that were there, to this school, and it was a 3-room schoolhouse. First, second, third grade in one, and fourth, fifth, and sixth, and seventh and eighth in another one or something, and then and so where we all went to grades like that, and I was a good student. I made good grades, and I always tell everybody I graduated second in my class. I was a salutatorian, but then I tell them there was 8 in my class. 8 in my graduating class. Lois McCarty was a student, and she was a valedictorian. She was smart. The girls in those days were smarter than the boys, and just studied harder or something, you know. But I don't know. My best friend out there for years and years was Curtis Jones, and he was killed in the death march, Baton Death March. He was a belligerent little. He liked to ride broncs and things like that, and shoot. A few times I'd get on a calf to try to ride them. I didn't do any good at all. They'd throw me off quick, and I didn't like it. But he was pretty tough that way, and I think he became belligerent with the people that captured him, and he sat on the side of the road and wasn't going to walk any further, and they just killed him there. So, there were very tough days, but by golly, a lot of things about them are nicer than what it is today.
When did you become interested in basketball and your basketball career?
Oh, since I could remember. That was such a small school, you couldn't have a football team. And so basketball was it. Even sometimes we only had 5 guys on our team, and our main opponents was Camado, Magdalena. Sometimes we'd play Socorro, but that was too big a school for us. We never did do well with them. Then we'd play Hurley High School in Silver City and Cliff. And then towards Arizona, we would play Springerville. Luna, in there halfway between Reserve and Springerville, came to Reserve and by bus to school. Kids from Mogollon and Glenwood came on buses. Well, what a long ride those kids had, riding buses every day that far. I don't know how they did it, but and we had an inside gym at this time, about this much space outside the boundary. I remember my dad, they had a stand, people had a stand, they just had room for their feet to be out of bounds, and for their toes, and I'd make a basket and my dad would throw his cap down and jump over it. That was his. So, and there was a stage at one end, there people did sit up there, and there were those for heating, I guess at both ends, behind the baskets was those old radiators, you know, that to heat it, and because those were dangerous things for running into them. Those days, we had Glenn and I had a basket, I don't know just when, before we had left that house, so it had to be pretty small. And gosh, the old dirt, there's a hole scooped out of the basket where we just trumped it out. And we just bathed on Saturday night, you know. Willis and I, the two boys in the family, I think they heated water twice. And the girls got to bathe first, and then Willis and I would use their bath water. And after playing basketball out there in that dirt, our legs would just be caked. We'd just get caked up with dirt. But the Saturday night was for bathing. Heat water and tea kettle, pour it in the tub, number 2 wash tub, and that's where we bathed. Where that old house is, you've seen it, out where Glenn McCarty's house is now, the big nice house, that's where our toilet was. And so, guys, if you had to go to the toilet in the middle of the night, you had to just go way out there. And it was a pit toilet, and when it would get full, we'd dig another pit beside it and use the dirt to cover over and move the toilet over to the pit. And everybody had the pit toilet, so Halloween we'd tip those things over. Old Dr. Birch, he lived on the side of this big hill. His toilet was right out there on the side of it. And Halloween we'd go and push that dang thing way down that hill. That must be, it must have been 200 feet. I don't know, that must be an exaggeration, but it's a deep canyon down there. It seems to be filled up more out there now, not like it was, but and then he'd pay us the next day to carry that toilet back up.
Do you think he knew?
Oh, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. I remember one time the few houses there in town on the east side of this main street. We went down a row, about 4 or 5 houses in a row, tipping them toilets over as we went. And the sheriff lived there. And for time, about the 4th one we got to was his, and we heard him holler, "Stop or I'll shoot!" And boy, we took off. Halloween, a couple of times we took an old wagon apart and carried it piece by piece up on the pitched roof of the mercantile store. That building may still be there, and reassemble that sitting across the peak of the roof. That was quite a thing. We probably didn't do that more than once, but I remember seeing up there at one time, everybody looking at it. It was quite an attraction.